Calder Vane had seen people beg, betray, and kill for his money. He had never found a terrified young woman asleep in the back seat of his private car with more than $2 million pressed against her chest. A violent autumn thunderstorm rolled across New Orleans that night, turning the Mississippi black beneath flashes of lightning. Rain hammered the glass walls of the Vane Grand Hotel, while wealthy donors gathered inside for a private charity event overlooking the river. Calder moved through the ballroom with the controlled authority of a man everyone recognized, but few approached casually. At 35, he controlled hotels, shipping interest, restaurants, and businesses that stretched far beyond what appeared on official paperwork. In New Orleans, the Vane name carried enough history that strangers rarely needed to be warned twice. His armored SUV in the underground garage was considered untouchable. Mara Ellison did not know that. At 28, Mara had spent the previous several weeks reviewing renovation expenses for the hotel as an outside forensic bookkeeping consultant. She had found duplicate invoices, contractors that barely existed, and payments routed through companies with no obvious reason to receive them. She had also been awake for almost 30 hours. Since her mother's death, Mara had quietly helped support her younger sister while trying to keep her own career from collapsing beneath medical bills and overdue expenses. Money was constantly on her mind. Stealing had never been. Near midnight, Mara carried a folder toward the employee parking area when raised voices drew her to a restricted section of the garage. She stopped behind a concrete pillar. Two men were arguing beside a dark sedan. One held a heavy black duffel. The confrontation changed without warning. A violent movement, a body striking concrete. Then one man stumbled backward, badly injured, leaving a dark smear across the floor. The duffel dropped near Mara. Before she could retreat, headlights swept across the garage. More men entered. They were searching. Mara understood only one thing. If they found her beside the injured man, explanations would not matter. She grabbed the fallen bag because it blocked her path and might contain something proving what she had witnessed. Then she ran. The first unlocked vehicle she reached was a black SUV parked several rows away. She climbed into back, pulled the door shut, and disappeared beneath the tinted windows. For several minutes, Mara remained perfectly still while armed figures moved through the garage. Adrenaline kept her alert. Then exhaustion took over. By the time Calder left the charity event, Mara was asleep across the rear seat with one hand wrapped around the duffel strap. Rhett Calloway, Calder's security chief, saw her first. His reaction was immediate suspicion. A stranger inside Calder's vehicle could be a thief, surveillance bait, or the beginning of an assassination attempt. Calder studied her instead. Her clothes were wet, her palms were scratched, and when she woke beneath the garage lights, fear hit her face before calculation ever could. Then Rhett pulled the duffel open. Stacks of bundled cash filled the interior. Calder's expression hardened. He recognized the banking bands instantly. The money came from an off-book Vane reserve that had supposedly been emptied 3 months earlier. Mara stared at the cash, then at Calder, finally understanding whose vehicle she had chosen. Of every car in New Orleans, she had hidden inside the one belonging to the man most capable of believing she had stolen millions from him. Then Rhett touched the side of the duffel and looked down. Fresh blood stained the black fabric, and it did not belong to Mara. Mara thought $2 million was the reason dangerous men were hunting her. Calder knew instantly that anyone willing to spill blood over that bag was probably protecting something worth far more than money. He did not take her to a police station. He did not return her to the hotel either. Within an hour, Mara was being driven through rain-darkened roads toward an isolated Vane property beside the Louisiana Bayou. The mansion stood behind iron gates and ancient oak trees, its white columns glowing beneath warm exterior lights. Beyond the house, cypress trees rose from black water, while rain disturbed the surface in endless circles. To Mara, the beauty meant nothing. She believed she had simply been moved somewhere private enough to disappear. Calder seemed to understand that fear. He never touched her. He never threatened her. Instead, he placed a blood-stained duffel on a long wooden table and began reconstructing the night piece by piece. Mara explained what she had witnessed in the garage. The argument, the injured man, the approaching headlights, the armed search. She admitted taking the bag, but insisted she had never even known what was inside until Rhett opened it. Calder listened without interrupting. Rhett soon confirmed the identity of the injured man. His name was Nolan Price, one of Calder's financial couriers. Price had failed to report in earlier that evening. That created a larger problem. The money inside the bag should never have been anywhere near the hotel. The off-book reserve had officially been emptied months earlier. Someone had either recreated the cash trail or concealed the fact that the account was still active. Calder's suspicion shifted inward. Mara noticed something before he did. Several currency bundles carried small accounting reference numbers. She recognized them. The same sequences had appeared in renovation invoices she had flagged during her audit. Shell companies, inactive contractors, payments routed through businesses that existed mostly on paper. Suddenly, Mara was no longer merely a frightened witness. She was the only person in the room who understood the financial pattern. Calder allowed her to examine the duffel more closely. One side had been torn during the garage struggle. Beneath the damaged seam, Mara felt something rigid. Rhett cut the lining carefully. A small encrypted storage device slid onto the table. The money had never been the real prize. It had been camouflage. Once the files were accessed through an isolated system, Mara began reading transaction histories stretching back more than a year. Large sums had been diverted from Calder control companies. The transfers were subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but consistent enough to reveal intent. Someone inside the Vane organization had been stealing systematically. Not thousands, millions. And whoever built the scheme understood Calder's internal accounting structure well enough to hide inside it. That meant the thief was not an outsider. Mara continued through the files until something familiar appeared. Her own consulting invoice. Her name. Her firm. Her payment schedule. Then more records surfaced. Someone had tracked which accounts she reviewed, which irregularities she flagged, and when she entered the hotel. Calder's expression changed. For the first time, Mara saw uncertainty beneath the control. He had believed she stumbled into his problem. Now, he understood someone had placed her directly in its path. The final file opened as a photograph. Mara was walking out of her apartment carrying groceries, completely unaware of the camera watching her. The image had been taken 3 weeks before she ever found the cash. Mara had believed she was unlucky enough to witness the wrong crime. The surveillance photograph proved someone had selected her long before she ever entered Calder Vane's car. By morning, the Bayou Mansion was no longer considered secure. Calder moved her back toward New Orleans, this time to a private upper floor above an old jazz club near the French Quarter. The building belonged to one of his legitimate companies and disappeared easily among glowing balconies, narrow streets, late-night crowds, and music drifting from brass instruments below. From the windows, the city looked alive. Inside, Mara felt hunted. She spent hours reviewing the files recovered from the concealed storage device. The deeper she went, the clearer the pattern became. Construction companies had been created, paid, and dissolved. Ghost employees collected salaries for jobs they never performed. Renovation contracts were inflated, then divided across multiple accounts before the money disappeared into a private financial network. The amounts were enormous. Calder recognized several of the companies immediately. They were connected to Graham Dorsey. For more than a decade, Dorsey had served as one of Calder's most trusted senior men. He had handled expansion projects, internal negotiations, and financial operations during some of the most dangerous years of Calder's leadership. Calder did not want the evidence to mean what it appeared to mean. Mara noticed. She also refused to soften the conclusion. Loyalty did not make numbers disappear. Trust did not erase transaction histories. The disagreement created their first real friction. Calder had survived by knowing who stood beside him. Mara had built her career by assuming every claim needed proof. Yet instead of shutting her down, Calder listened. That surprised her. As they continued, Mara learned why Dorsey might have turned against him. Over the previous several years, Calder had been closing violent Vane operations and pushing more of the organization toward legitimate businesses. Older loyalists hated the changes. To them, restraint looked like weakness. The stolen money now appeared to be funding something larger than personal theft. It looked like preparation for a takeover. Then Mara found a record that explained why she had been brought into the hotel audit. Her consulting firm had not been chosen randomly. Someone connected to Dorsey had specifically requested her. Mara's professional history showed that she was unusually good at spotting inconsistencies. Her personal history showed something else. Debt, family expenses, financial pressure after her mother's death. Someone had studied all of it. The plan became horrifyingly clear. Mara was meant to uncover enough irregularities to look curious, then be discovered with stolen money. If she vanished afterward, investigators would see an overworked accountant with financial problems who had finally taken the wrong opportunity. Calder would see a thief. The police would see motive. Dorsey would keep his network hidden. The garage confrontation had simply gone wrong. Mara stared at the records and understood the part that hurt most. They had not chosen her because she was foolish. They had chosen her because they believed no powerful person would care if she disappeared. Calder understood it too. Before either could process that realization, Rhett entered with new security footage. The timestamp was current. The image showed Graham Dorsey walking calmly through the front entrance of Mara's apartment building. While Mara was hiding with Calder, Dorsey had gone directly to her home. Calder had spent his life believing walls, guards, and money could keep people safe. Mara was about to teach him how quickly protection could become another kind of prison. After Dorsey appeared at her apartment building, Calder moved her again. This time, they disappeared into a secluded wooden house near the edge of a cypress preserve, where mist drifted across dark wetlands and moss-covered trees leaned over narrow channels of still water. A long dock stretched behind the property, disappearing into gray morning fog. The place was beautiful. Mara hated it almost immediately. There were guards near every entrance. Security cameras watched the driveway. Rhett controlled who entered, who left, and when. Calder considered it necessary. Mara considered it another reminder that her life no longer belonged entirely to her. Her frustration finally became impossible to hide. She had survived Dorsey choosing her as disposable. She would not survive Calder deciding that protecting her gave him the right to control every movement she made. The point landed harder than he expected. Calder was used to solving danger by increasing security. More men, more walls, more control. For Mara, those things did not automatically mean safety. Sometimes they meant losing the ability to choose. Something shifted after that. Calder stopped giving instructions when questions would work instead. When Mara returned to the financial records, he began asking what she thought rather than telling her what needed to be done. The change was small. It mattered anyway. Mara also began seeing the pressure he carried. Calder was not simply protecting her from Dorsey. He was trying to hold together an organization where longtime allies were beginning to question him. Rivals were watching for weakness, and every decision against the old ways created another enemy. Then Mara found the next pattern. Dorsey had been making unusually large payments to selected Vane employees. They looked like bonuses. They were not. The recipients included drivers, property managers, security personnel, and several men positioned close enough to Calder to know his movements. Dorsey had not only been stealing money, he had been buying loyalty. Calder understood the implication immediately. The coup might already be inside his security structure. Rhett began checking personnel one by one. 3 guards failed verification. A 4th stopped answering completely. Then the storm reached the preserve. Wind bent the trees toward the water. Rain struck the roof. Without warning, the power died. Exterior lights vanished. The security system dropped into backup mode. One vehicle stationed near the front gate stopped responding. Rhett knew what that meant. The safe house had been compromised. Calder could have moved first. Instead, he made sure the cook caretaker and 2 household employees were evacuated through the rear service route before leaving himself. Mara watched him step into danger for people who held no power over him. That was the moment her understanding of him changed. His reputation had taught her to expect possession. His behavior was beginning to show restraint. They escaped by boat through a narrow channel before Dorsey's people reached the property. Hours later, inside another temporary location, Mara reopened the financial files. One transaction made her stop breathing. A payment had been scheduled for the following night. The authorization attached to it belonged to only one person, Calder Vane. Mara already knew Dorsey had framed her, because she looked vulnerable. She did not know he had chosen her because he expected Calder Vane to kill her. The authorization code led them to Calder's legitimate riverboat hospitality operation along the Mississippi, where private dining decks, polished brass railings, and warm interior lights move against the black water. The scheduled payment had been routed through one of the riverfront accounts. Mara reviewed the records while the city lights drifted past windows. Then the entire plan finally became clear. Dorsey had never expected her to escape with the money. He expected Calder to find her. A financially strained outside accountant would be discovered inside Calder's vehicle with millions in stolen cash. No criminal connections. No powerful family. No one likely to challenge the story. Calder's reputation would do the rest. For years, people had believed that anyone who stole from him simply disappeared. Dorsey had built a scheme around that fear. Mara would become the thief. The missing money would become her motive, and Calder would unknowingly remove the only independent accountant capable of tracing the fraud back to Dorsey. Mara understood why she was still alive. Calder had done the one thing Dorsey never planned for. He listened. That realization changed something between them. Calder was disturbed for another reason. He had never ordered Mara's death, but his name had accumulated enough fear that Dorsey confidently assumed he would. Calder could not dismiss that as someone else's corruption. He had inherited an organization built partly on intimidation, then spent years benefiting from the obedience that reputation created. Now the same reputation had nearly killed an innocent woman. Mara did not soften the truth for him. Regret meant little if nothing changed afterward. If Calder wanted to become different from the men who built the old Vane empire, the cost would eventually have to be real. Calder accepted that without defending himself. Their connection deepened in the quiet that followed. Mara no longer saw only the feared mafia boss who had found her in his car. Calder no longer saw only the accountant trapped inside his problem. Each had begun forcing the other to confront truths they would rather avoid. Then Dorsey made his move publicly. Word spread through senior Vane circles that Mara Ellison had stolen millions and manipulated Calder into protecting her. Several longtime figures demanded that she be surrendered for questioning. Calder refused. The decision transformed Mara from a hidden witness into something far more dangerous. She became proof that Calder was rejecting the old rules. Dorsey responded by freezing access to several Vane accounts through bankers and managers already loyal to him. Within hours, millions became inaccessible. Properties risked losing payroll. Business operations began tightening. The message was obvious. Calder could protect his empire, or he could protect Mara. She understood what everyone expected him to choose. Handing her over could calm the organization, restore access, and make the crisis disappear. For one terrible moment, Mara wondered whether even Calder had limits. Then he issued the order. Every compromise account was to be permanently closed. Millions of dollars would be sacrificed rather than allowed to become leverage. Calder chose to burn part of his own fortune before he would hand Mara over. Mara had believed men like Calder protected money before people. Then she watched him destroy a fortune simply to make sure nobody could use it to purchase her life. Closing the compromised accounts hurt Dorsey immediately. It also weakened Calder. Millions disappeared from his control overnight. Several legitimate businesses lost emergency reserves, and the financial advantage that had protected the Vane organization for years suddenly became thinner. The sacrifice was real. With most of Calder's New Orleans properties compromised, Rhett moved them to a modern house along the Louisiana Gulf Coast. The raised wooden structure stood above wind-swept dunes facing gray water. Emergency shutters covered several windows as a tropical storm pushed toward shore, sending waves against the coast beneath a darkening sky. Inside, Mara worked beside Calder and Rhett to identify the people still loyal to Dorsey. The financial records were worse than expected. The original $2 million had only been one piece of a much larger reserve. Dorsey had redirected money into hidden accounts, private security contracts, vehicles, weapons purchases, and payments to employees positioned throughout Calder's businesses. He had not been preparing to challenge Calder someday. He had been preparing for Calder to die. The realization changed the scale of everything. Dorsey intended to seize control after an assassination and make the transition look inevitable. For the first time, Mara wondered whether staying near Calder was making both of them easier targets. She could leave. The thought frightened her, because part of her wanted to. Calder did not argue when she raised the possibility. Instead, he arranged transportation, access to clean funds, legal protection, and a secure place far from Louisiana if she chose to disappear. He gave her the one thing she had not expected from a man with his reputation. A choice. That mattered more than protection. Mara stayed. Not because Calder ordered her to. Not because she believed she owed him. She stayed because Dorsey's plan threatened drivers, accountants, hotel employees, security workers, and people who had no idea they were standing inside someone else's coup. She knew enough to help stop it. Something between her and Calder became quieter after that. Neither tried to name what was developing. Their attachment had grown through decisions rather than promises. Calder had repeatedly refused to own her choices. Mara had repeatedly refused to abandon him, simply because staying was dangerous. Then Rhett received evidence that Dorsey was gathering loyalists at an abandoned sugar estate outside the city. The property had once belonged to an early Vane business partner and carried decades of violent family history. Dorsey planned to force senior figures to recognize him as a new leader. Mara's supposed theft would become as proof that Calder had grown weak. Before they could prepare, Mara returned to the authorization records. Something bothered her. The stolen code had not been extracted remotely. There was no digital breach, no malware, no outside access. Someone had physically copied Calder's authorization sequence from a secure device kept close to him. Only a handful of people could have reached it. Mara traced the access log twice. The result did not change. The evidence pointed toward Rhett Calloway, the one man Calder still trusted with his life. Calder expected betrayal from enemies. The possibility that Rhett had betrayed him was the one wound he was not prepared to survive. Months earlier, Calder might have reacted first and investigated later. This time, he did the opposite. He ordered the authorization records examined from the beginning. Mara noticed a weakness before anyone else. The access trail pointing toward Rhett was almost too perfect. Every timestamp aligned cleanly. Every entry led toward the same conclusion. Real financial theft rarely looked that convenient. Someone had built the trail specifically to be discovered. Dorsey was not only trying to take Calder's organization, he was trying to leave him emotionally isolated before doing it. Further review exposed altered access logs and duplicated security credentials. Rhett was cleared enough for the immediate plan to continue. By the following evening, the tropical storm had begun breaking apart. Clouds opened above the old sugar estate outside New Orleans, where wet fields stretched beneath enormous oak trees and abandoned brick buildings stood beside rusted processing equipment. Dorsey had gathered senior Vane figures inside the main house. He expected Calder to arrive with armed men and threats. Instead, Calder brought records. Mara came with him. Several men looked genuinely stunned when she entered. The woman they had been told stole $2 million was supposed to be hiding, dead, or running. Instead, she walked into the center of the coup, carrying the evidence that could destroy it. Mara laid out the financial pattern carefully. Fake construction contracts, ghost employees, hidden reserves, purchase loyalty, payments tied directly to Dorsey control companies. Then she showed how the original cash had been routed through accounts Dorsey had secretly managed. The supposed theft had never belonged to her. It had been designed around her. Calder revealed the next blow. The compromised accounts were already gone. He had permanently closed them. The fortune Dorsey had promised his supporters no longer existed. The mood inside the estate shifted immediately. Several men who had believed they were choosing the winning side began realizing they had been buying into an empty future. Dorsey tried to recover control by turning Mara into Calder's weakness. But Calder refused to defend himself through violence. He had already made the choice that mattered. He had risked money, influence, and loyalty rather than sacrifice someone innocent to preserve his reputation. Dorsey had built his entire plan on ownership. Calder was dismantling it by proving that loyalty forced through fear was never loyalty at all. One by one, Dorsey's supporters stepped away. Outside the estate, financial investigators already possessed copies of the records connecting his network to fraud, laundering, and theft. There was nowhere left for him to hide the structure he had built. The coup ended without the bloodbath he had expected. Mara watched Calder stand in the ruins of his old power and understood how much had changed. The mafia boss who had once found her asleep beside stolen cash had risked his empire to prove she had never been disposable. Later, Rhett returned the original duffel for final evidence processing. Mara examined the damaged lining one last time. Her fingers found a thin pocket hidden beneath the inner seam. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her full name was written across the front. Mara Ellison. Mara survived being framed for stealing $2 million. The final secret was that part of the money had actually been intended for her. Several months passed after Dorsey's fall. Calder restructured what remained of the Vane organization. Businesses built around intimidation, coercion, and illegal control were severed wherever possible. The legitimate hotels, restaurants, shipping interests, and properties remained under tighter oversight. Rhett stayed as Calder's security chief, though nothing operated with the blind trust that had once allowed Dorsey to build power unnoticed. Mara returned to independent financial consulting. She refused Calder's offers to make her part of his companies, not because she wanted distance from him, but because she needed the life she built to remain hers. Calder understood. Their relationship developed quietly. No public declarations. No expectations. He visited when invited and never treated saving her life as a debt she had to repay with affection. Eventually, Mara opened the envelope discovered inside the duffel. The documents inside changed the meaning of the entire night. Nolan Price, the courier attacked in the parking garage, had discovered Dorsey's financial scheme weeks before Mara ever found the bag. He knew internal reporting channels were compromised. He needed someone outside the Vane organization who could understand the accounting trail without being controlled by it. He chose Mara. Her reputation for finding hidden inconsistencies had made her valuable, not disposable. The documents revealed that a smaller portion of the money had been separated from Dorsey's stolen reserve as emergency protection. If exposed and the evidence placed Mara in danger, Nolan intended that money to help her disappear safely until authorities could act. For months, Mara had believed she was targeted because someone looked at her life and saw weakness. Now she understood that at least one person had looked at the same life and seen integrity. The realization affected her more deeply than the money ever could. She refused to keep the legitimate portion for herself. Instead, she arranged for it to support employees and families financially damaged by Dorsey's fraud. The duffel that had once made her look guilty eventually became evidence of why she had been chosen in the first place. By early spring, Mara stood with Calder at a restored lakeside property outside New Orleans. Morning sunlight moved across calm water. There was no storm, no armed convoy, no crowd of men waiting for Calder's orders. Just quiet. Mara understood that loving him did not require surrendering her independence. Calder understood that protecting her, without giving her choices, would only become another form of control. He had never asked her to abandon her career. She had never asked him to become someone different through promises alone. They had both watched the other prove change through decisions that carried real costs. Months earlier, Mara had climbed into Calder's car because she was desperate to escape dangerous men. Now she remained beside him for the opposite reason. She finally knew she was free to leave. Then one unfinished transaction appeared while Mara was closing Dorsey's remaining accounts. The payment originated outside Louisiana, and beside it was a name neither Mara nor Calder had ever seen before.